The faculty lounge at North Oak High was usually a sanctuary of stale coffee and low-stakes gossip. But as Sarah stood over the heavy-duty Xerox machine, the rhythmic clicking of the paper tray sounded like a countdown. She had arrived at 6 a.m., an hour before the custodial staff, seeking the quiet she needed to grade midterms. Instead, she found a single sheet of high-gloss paper jammed in the feeder. When she cleared the obstruction, her breath hitched. It wasn't a lesson plan. It was a high-resolution surveillance photograph of herself, taken from the tree line across the street from her house. Over her face, a single word was written in thick, dark crimson ink. Target. Sarah's fingers didn't tremble. That was the first sign that her old life hadn't fully left her. A normal history teacher would have screamed or called the police. Sarah simply folded the paper, slid it into her blazer pocket, and scanned the room for the telltale red glow of a lens. She knew the school security grid by heart. She had discreetly mapped it during her first week. There was a blind spot near the vending machines, and that was exactly where she sensed a presence. The air in the room shifted, the atmospheric pressure dropping as the heavy door creaked open. In walked Elias Thorne, the new civics teacher who had joined the staff only 48 hours ago. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed too broad for his off-the-rack corduroy jacket. His eyes weren't the eyes of an educator. They were the cold, calibrated eyes of a man who measured the distance to the nearest exit and the weight of potential weapons in every room. He didn't look at the coffee pot. He looked directly at Sarah's pocket where the photo was hidden. "Early start, Sarah," Thorne said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that felt like a threat wrapped in a pleasantry. The early bird catches the worm, or so they say. Sarah forced a tight professional smile, the mask she had worn for 3 years since leaving the agency. "Just catching up on grading, Mr. Thorne. I didn't realize you were an early riser." "I don't sleep much," Thorne replied, stepping closer. He invaded her personal space with the calculated intent of a predator. He reached for a stack of papers on the counter, his sleeve pulling back just enough to reveal a sliver of a tattoo on his wrist. A black trident wrapped in barbed wire. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, not out of fear, but recognition. That mark belonged to the Vanguard Group, a supposedly disbanded deniable wetwork team after a scorched earth scandal in the Balkans. Thorne wasn't just a teacher, he was a cleaner. And if he was here, it meant the quiet life Sarah had built on a foundation of lies was about to be burned to the ground. She realized then that the photo wasn't just a threat, it was a greeting. The first bell rang, a shrill, industrial scream that signaled the start of a Tuesday that felt like a funeral. Sarah sat at her desk in room 302, watching her students trickle in. Among them was Leo, a brilliant but troubled senior who spent more time hacking the school's mainframe than studying the Industrial Revolution. Leo looked pale. As he passed Sarah's desk, he dropped a crumpled sticky note. It read, "The new guy isn't on the payroll." Sarah didn't look up. She waited until the class was engaged in a silent reading assignment before she opened her laptop. She didn't use the school's filtered Wi-Fi. She tethered to a burner phone, entering a string of coordinates into a private server she hadn't touched in years. If Elias Thorne wasn't on the payroll, it meant someone in the administration had bypassed the standard background checks. That required high-level clearance, or a very deep pocket. From her window, she could see the faculty parking lot. Thorne was standing by his SUV, a nondescript black Suburban with tinted windows. He wasn't checking his phone or drinking coffee. He was watching the school buses unload. Sarah watched his posture. He stood in a ready rest position, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. He was scanning the crowd, not for a student, but for a specific profile. During the lunch break, Sarah found herself in the cafeteria, seated across from Mrs. Gable, the school counselor. Gable was the school's pulse. She knew every secret from the principal's drinking habit to which students were selling diverted prescriptions. Elias Thorne is a bit intense, don't you think? Sarah asked, keeping her tone light, the curious colleague. Gable leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. He gives me the chills, Sarah. Principal Miller hired him over a weekend. No interview with the board, no demo lesson. And have you seen the way the security guard, Briggs, looks at him? Like he's seen a ghost. Sarah glanced at Officer Briggs, the retired cop who handled school security. Briggs was currently leaning against the wall, but he wasn't looking at the students. He was staring at Thorne with a mixture of terror and subservience. Briggs was a man who knew who was at the top of the food chain, and it wasn't the principal. He's a decorated veteran, apparently, special forces, but there's something missing in those eyes, like there's nothing behind them but a mission. Sarah knew that look. She had seen it in the mirror before she walked away from the black sites and the interrogations that didn't exist on paper. She realized Thorne wasn't here for her, not primarily. He was looking for something else, and she was just an obstacle he had identified early. As she left the cafeteria, Sarah saw Leo being pulled into an empty classroom by Thorne. The door clicked shut and the "in use" sign flipped. Sarah didn't hesitate. She detoured toward the maintenance closet. It was time to see what the cleaner wanted with her smartest student. The maintenance closet shared a ventilation duct with the empty classroom Thorne had commandeered. Sarah climbed the ladder with a grace that defied her modest teacher's attire. Pressing her ear to the metal grate, she heard the low, rhythmic thrum of Thorne's voice. It wasn't an interrogation, it was a negotiation. "The encryption you broke last night, Leo," Thorne said, his voice cold as a winter morgue. "You didn't just find the school's budget, you found the ghost ledger. Tell me where you moved the files." Leo's voice was high-pitched, vibrating with raw terror. I didn't move them. I just looked. I thought it was a game, a backdoor challenge left by the previous admin." "There are no games here," Thorne hissed. There was a dull thud, the sound of a body being pinned against a chalkboard. "That ledger contains the locations of 6 safe houses and the identities of 12 operatives currently in the field. If that data hits the dark web, people die. I am here to ensure that doesn't happen. Now, give me the drive." Sarah felt a surge of cold fury. Thorne was using a school as a staging ground for a compromised intelligence operation. But something didn't add up. If Thorne were a U.S. killer acting on behalf of the government to secure the data, he wouldn't be threatening a teenager in a public school. He would have snatched him off the street. This was an off-books recovery. Thorne was working for a rogue element. "I gave it to Miss Sarah," Leo blurted out. Sarah froze. It was a lie, a desperate attempt by Leo to buy time or involve the only adult he trusted. Thorne's silence was more terrifying than his speech. The history teacher? The one with the phantom file at the bureau? Interesting. I wondered why she smelled like cordite and regret. Sarah dropped from the ladder, her boots hitting the floor with a muffled thud. She had seconds before Thorne exited that room. She sprinted toward the library, her mind racing. If Thorne believed she had the drive, the school was no longer a safe zone. It was a kill box. She reached the library's back office, a cramped room filled with microfiche and old yearbooks. She pulled a hidden compartment under the floorboards, a failsafe she'd prepared months ago. Inside was a compact 9mm, 2 spare magazines, and a handheld jammer. She didn't want to use them. She had promised herself she was done with the noise. Just as the handgun was holstered under her blazer, the library door swung open. It wasn't Thorne. It was Principal Miller, his face flushed and sweating. He looked like a man who was watching his world collapse. "Sarah," he gasped, "we need to talk. In my office, now. It's about your background. It seems there was an omission in your hiring paperwork that Mr. Thorne has brought to my attention." The trap was closing. Thorne had used Leo to confirm Sarah was a threat, and now he was using the principal to isolate her. Principal Miller's office was a mahogany-lined tomb. He sat behind his desk, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Standing in the corner, half hidden by the shadows of a tall bookshelf, was Elias Thorne. He was holding a folder, Sarah's real folder, the one that didn't exist in the Department of Education's database. "Sarah," Miller began, his voice trembling, "Mr. Thorne here, he represents a certain interest, a federal oversight committee. He tells me your name isn't actually Sarah Jenkins. He says you were part of a specialized unit called Aegis, a unit responsible for several high-profile disappearances in South America." Sarah didn't look at Miller. She kept her eyes on Thorne. "The Vanguard group calling out Aegis for ethics? That's like a wolf complaining about a fox's diet." Thorne smiled, a dry, humorless expression. "Aegis was a scalp hunting outfit. You were their best tracker, and now you're hiding in a suburb, teaching kids about the Magna Carta. It's a waste of talent, Sarah, or should I call you the Wraith?" Sarah said, "You can call me whatever you like, but we both know you're not here on behalf of any committee. You're here for the drive Leo found, the one that proves this school's basement is being used as a relay station for intercepted CIA comms." Miller's jaw dropped. "A what? Sarah, what are you talking about?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected her to know about the relay. "The principal is just the landlord, Sarah. He gets a nice monthly donation to the school's athletic fund, and in exchange he doesn't ask why the server room in the basement uses enough electricity to power a small city." "And Leo?" asked Sarah. "What happens to the kid who saw too much?" "Leo is a liability," Thorne said simply, "but he's a negotiable one. Give me the drive, and I'll ensure he gets a scholarship to a very distant, very secure university. Refuse, and he becomes a tragic statistic of a school shooting that was prevented by my heroic intervention." The escalation was clear. Thorne was planning a controlled incident. He would kill Leo, kill Sarah, and walk away as the hero who stopped a disgruntled teacher. Suddenly, the school's fire alarm began to wail, not the rhythmic pulse of a drill, but the frantic, broken scream of a system being manually overridden. "That's not me," Thorne muttered, reaching for his waist. "That's Leo," Sarah countered. "I told him if I wasn't out of this office in 5 minutes, he should trigger the lockdown sequence and dump the ledger to the local police." Thorne lunged, but Sarah was faster. She kicked the heavy oak desk into Miller, pinning him against the wall, and used the momentum to dive through the glass partition into the hallway. The hunt was officially on. The hallways were a chaos of slamming lockers and shouting students. The automated lockdown shutters began to hiss as they descended over the windows, sealing North Oak High in a steel shroud. Blue emergency lights flickered on, casting the school in an eerie underwater glow. Sarah moved through the crowd with surgical precision. She knew the Vanguard protocol. Thorne wouldn't work alone. He would have at least 2 others on the security staff who were actually his teammates. As she rounded the corner toward the science wing, she saw Officer Briggs. He was no longer the lazy security guard. He was holding a suppressed submachine gun, ushering a group of terrified students into the gym. "Briggs!" Sarah shouted. The guard turned, his eyes wide. He leveled the weapon, but Sarah didn't stop. She threw a heavy textbook she'd snatched from a locker. It struck the barrel, knocking the aim off as a burst of lead shredded the Student of the Month bulletin board. Sarah closed the distance in 3 strides. She gripped Briggs's wrist, twisted it until the bone popped, and drove her palm into his chin. He went down hard. She stripped the radio from his belt. "Thorne, this is Sarah. I've got your security. The police are 10 minutes out." "The police won't get through the gates, Sarah." Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. "I've jammed all cellular signals within a 2-mile radius, and the police who do show up will be wearing my patches. You're playing an old game with a new set of rules." Sarah ducked into a chemistry lab, her mind working through the geometry of the building. She needed Leo. If Thorne found the boy first, the boy was dead. She looked at the lab equipment. Glycerin, potassium permanganate, and glass flasks. It was crude, but it would work. She heard heavy footsteps in the hall. 2 men. Not Thorne. His gait was quieter. These were the grunts. "Check the labs," one of them barked. Sarah finished her makeshift distraction. She rolled a pressurized canister of CO2 toward the door and rigged a simple tripwire. As the door kicked open, she dove behind the lead-lined fume hood. The explosion wasn't loud, but the cloud of freezing vapor and chemical smoke was blinding. In the confusion, Sarah emerged like a ghost. She didn't use her gun. She used a heavy glass beaker and the edge of a lab stool. Within 30 seconds, both men were unconscious on the floor. She stripped the radio from his belt. "Thorne, this is Sarah. I've got your security. The police are 10 minutes out." "The police won't get through the gates, Sarah," Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. "I've jammed all cellular signals within a 2-mile radius, and the police who do show up will be wearing my patches. You're playing an old game with a new set of rules." Sarah ducked into a chemistry lab, her mind working through the geometry of the building. She needed Leo. If Thorne found the boy first, the boy was dead. She looked at the lab equipment. Glycerin, potassium permanganate, and glass flasks. It was crude, but it would work. She heard heavy footsteps in the hall. 2 men. Not Thorne. His gait was quieter. These were the grunts. "Check the labs," one of them barked. Sarah finished her makeshift distraction. She rolled a pressurized canister of CO2 toward the door and rigged a simple tripwire. As the door kicked open, she dove behind the lead-lined fume hood. The explosion wasn't loud, but the cloud of freezing vapor and chemical smoke was blinding. In the confusion, Sarah emerged like a ghost. She didn't use her gun. She used a heavy glass beaker and the edge of a lab stool. Within 30 seconds, both men were unconscious on the floor. She stripped the radio from his belt. "Thorne, this is Sarah. I've got your security. The police are 10 minutes out." The basement of North Oak High was a labyrinth of rusted pipes and humming electrical transformers. But behind a false wall in the furnace room lay a world of gleaming white plastic and fiber optic cables. This was the Ghost Ledger's physical home, a rogue server farm disguised as school infrastructure. Sarah found Leo huddled behind a rack of servers, his laptop open, his face illuminated by the scrolling green code of a decryption sequence. "Miss Sarah," he gasped, nearly dropping his computer. I found it. It's not just CIA comms. It's a domestic hit list. They're using the school's location because it's a dead zone for satellite surveillance. Nobody looks for a black site under a volleyball court." "Can you upload it?" Sarah asked, checking the door. "The jammer Thorne mentioned. It's hardware-based," Leo said, his fingers flying across the keys. "There's a transmitter on the roof. If I try to send it now, it'll just bounce back and fry the drive. Someone has to manually disable the antenna." "That would be me," Sarah said. "You were a legend in Aegis, Sarah," Thorne said, circling her. "They told us stories about the Wraith of the Andes, how you took down a cartel outpost with nothing but a wire and a flare gun. I always wanted to see if the stories were true." "The stories were warnings, Thorne," Sarah replied, sliding into a low combative stance, "not invitations." "You went soft," Thorne spat. "You started caring about the collateral, like this kid, like this town. That's what makes you weak." Thorne lunged. He was fast, faster than any man his size should be. The knife blurred in a series of strikes aimed at Sarah's throat and femoral artery. Sarah parried with her forearms, the sting of the cold steel grazing her sleeve. She used his momentum to throw him toward a server rack, but he twisted in midair, landing like a cat. He came at her again, a flurry of strikes. Sarah realized she couldn't win a battle of pure strength. She had to use the environment. She reached into her pocket and threw a handful of magnesium shavings she'd taken from the chemistry lab into the server's cooling fan. A blinding flash of white light exploded as the shavings ignited. Thorne screamed, momentarily blinded. Sarah didn't hesitate. She delivered a crushing roundhouse kick to his ribs, followed by a throat strike that sent him reeling. "Leo, go to the roof. Take the maintenance stairs. I'll hold him here." Leo didn't wait. He sprinted toward the exit, grabbed his laptop, and sprinted toward the exit. Thorne, gasping for air, looked up at Sarah with a bloody grin. "You think you're the only one they sent?" Thorne was down, but he wasn't out. He rolled to his feet, clutching his throat, his eyes burning with a manic intensity. "The reinforcements aren't coming to save me, Sarah. They're coming to sanitize the whole zip code. You think they'd let a breach like this survive?" Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's air conditioning. Sanitize? There are 500 kids in this building. 500 unfortunate casualties of a catastrophic gas leak, Thorne rasped. The tankers are already at the perimeter. They're going to flood the basement and the ventilation system. In 10 minutes, this school becomes a vacuum. Sarah realized the scale of the betrayal. This wasn't just a rogue recovery, it was a total erasure. The Vanguard group was burning its own assets, including Thorne. "They're killing you too, Elias," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Look at your comms. Are they even responding?" Thorne reached for his earpiece. Silence. His face shifted from predatory confidence to a hollow, pale realization. He had been a loyal soldier for a ghost, and the ghost was about to vanish. "The roof," Thorne whispered. "The antenna isn't just a jammer. It's the trigger for the gas release. If Leo touches it, he'll set off the valves." Sarah didn't wait for him to finish. She sprinted for the stairs. Her legs burned as she took them 3 at a time, flying past the second floor where terrified teachers were trying to keep students calm. She reached the maintenance ladder to the roof just as she heard the heavy thrum of a helicopter approaching. She burst onto the gravel roof into a gale of wind. The sky was gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Leo was standing by the massive satellite array, his hand hovering over a lever. "Leo, stop!" Sarah screamed over the wind. He turned, startled. "I found the manual override. If I pull this, the signal dies." "It's a trap, Sarah," Sarah yelled, running toward him. "It's connected to the gas mains in the basement." Just then, the helicopter, a sleek black bird with no markings, rose over the edge of the roof. A sniper leaned out of the side door, the red dot of a laser sight dancing across the gravel, searching for a target. It settled on Leo's chest. Sarah tackled the boy just as a high-velocity round shattered the control box where his head had been a second before. They rolled across the gravel, seeking cover behind a brick chimney. "They're shooting at us," Leo cried, hyperventilating. "Stay down," Sarah demanded. She pulled her 9mm. The helicopter was circling for another pass. She had 15 rounds and a dream. But she also had something else, the handheld jammer she'd taken from the library. "Leo, give me your laptop. I need to override the helicopter's flight stabilization." "What? How?" "Just do it." As the helicopter swung around, Sarah didn't aim for the pilot. She aimed for the sensor pod beneath the nose. The helicopter's sniper was recalibrating. Sarah knew she had seconds. She didn't just need to survive. She needed to take that bird down without leveling the school. "Leo, I need a local Bluetooth handshake with that sensor pod," Sarah shouted, her fingers flying over his keyboard while she used the chimney as a shield. "Most of these black contractors use off-the-shelf avionics for their pods because they're easier to replace." "Got it," Leo yelled, his terror being replaced by the focus of a coder. "Handshake established. It's asking for a bypass code." Try the manufacturer's default for the 2024 Falcon series. It's usually the project lead's initials or a string of zeros. He typed furiously. It worked! I'm in the sensor submenu. Blind them. Loop the last 5 seconds of video so they think we're still behind the chimney, then tilt the gimbal to the max. On the helicopter, the sniper frowned at his monitor. The targets were standing still, huddled in fear. He signaled the pilot to hover for a clean shot. But the pilot was suddenly fighting the controls. The sensor pod, acting as an unintended gyroscope, began to whip back and forth, confusing the flight computer. Sarah stood up, stepped into the open, and leveled her 9mm. She didn't fire at the cockpit. She fired 3 rapid, precise shots into the intake of the turbine. The engine coughed, a plume of black smoke erupting from the housing. The helicopter lurched, the pilot losing the battle with the corrupted avionics. It began to spin, drifting away from the school and toward the empty football field. With a deafening roar of twisting metal, it slammed into the turf, the rotor shattering like glass. "Is it over?" Leo whispered, peering over the chimney. "No," Sarah said, looking at the basement hatch. "Thorn is still down there, and the gas tankers are at the gate." She looked at the jammer in her hand. Then she looked at the antenna. "Leo, if we can't disable the antenna without triggering the gas, we have to change the signal. Can you broadcast the ghost ledger to every news station in the state using the antenna's power?" Leo's eyes lit up. "It'll blow the hardware, but yeah, it'll act like a pirate radio tower on steroids." "Do it. Now." As Leo began the broadcast, Sarah headed back down. She had one more person to deal with. Principal Miller was a coward, but he was also a witness. And Thorn. Thorn was a man who needed to decide if he wanted to die a tool or live as a ghost.
The basement was filling with a faint, sweet smell, the precursor to the gas. Sarah found Thorn sitting against a server rack, his breathing labored. He had tied a makeshift bandage around his neck. "You did it, didn't you?" he rasped. "I saw the light show on the roof." "The ledger is being broadcast to every major outlet in the country, Elias," Sarah said, standing over him. "The Vanguard group doesn't exist anymore. By tomorrow morning, they'll be the most hunted men on Earth." Thorn laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Then we're both dead. They have deep roots, Sarah. They'll find us." "Let them try," Sarah said. She reached down and offered him a hand. "The gas is coming. If you want to live, move now." Thorn looked at her hand, then at the door. For the first time, the coldness in his eyes flickered. He took her hand and pulled himself up. Upstairs, the school was a scene of frantic activity. The police had finally breached the gates. Real police this time, led by a local sheriff who looked confused by the black-clad contractors fleeing the scene. Sarah ushered Thorn toward the back exit, the one that led to the woods. "Go. Use the name on the second passport in your Suburban. It's still valid." Thorn paused at the tree line. "Why let me go?" "Because you were right," Sarah said. "I do care about the collateral. And today, you were just another casualty I decided not to take." Thorn vanished into the trees without a word. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her hair and adjusting her glasses. She walked toward the front of the school, where Principal Miller was being loaded into a police cruiser in handcuffs. Officer Briggs was nowhere to be found. He had slipped away in the chaos. Sarah made a mental note to track him down later. Some things couldn't be left to chance. Mrs. Gable ran up to her, sobbing. "Sarah, you're okay. I heard shots." "Just the boiler acting up, Martha," Sarah said, her voice returning to her calm, professional teacher tone. "It's been a very long day. Is Leo safe?" "He's with the paramedics. He's telling them some wild story about hackers and helicopters. Poor boy must be in shock." Sarah laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "He always did have a vivid imagination. I'll go talk to him." As she walked toward the ambulance, Sarah felt the weight of the 9mm against her side. She knew this wasn't the end. The Vanguard was a many-headed hydra, and she had only cut off one. But as she saw Leo wave to her, a genuine smile on his face, she knew one thing for certain. North Oak High had the best history teacher in the world, and she was just getting started.
2 weeks later, the North Oak incident had faded from the national headlines, replaced by the explosive scandal of the ghost ledger. High-ranking officials were resigning, and a private military company had been liquidated overnight. Sarah sat in a small diner 3 towns over, sipping a black coffee. She was wearing a new wig, blonde this time, and a sharp suit. On the table before her was a newspaper. The headline read, "Local teacher declared hero in gas leak bravery." A man sat down across from her. He was older, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Sarah's annual salary. "You caused quite a stir, Sarah," the man said. "The agency is conflicted. Half of them want to pin a medal on you, the other half want you in a hole." "Hello, Director," Sarah said without looking up. "I assume you're here to offer me my old job back." "I'm here to tell you that Elias Thorne didn't make it to the border," the director said. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "He didn't die," the director corrected. "He turned himself in, but not to us, to Leo. He gave the kid a secondary drive, something even the ghost ledger didn't have." The director pushed a small USB stick across the table. Thorne said it was a graduation present for his favorite student. "Leo gave it to us, but it's encrypted with a code only you would know." Sarah picked up the drive. She knew what it was. It was the location of the other schools. North Oak wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pilot program. There were dozens of cleaners acting as teachers across the country, guarding nodes of a shadow network that had been growing for decades. "The war isn't over, is it?" Sarah asked. "It's just beginning, and we need the Wraith, not the teacher." Sarah looked out the window. She thought of Leo, who was now studying cybersecurity at MIT on a full scholarship. She thought of the quiet hallways of North Oak and the smell of old books. Then she thought of the children still sitting in classrooms, unaware that their civics teacher was a professional killer. She stood up, leaving the coffee untouched. She picked up the USB drive and slid it into her pocket. "I'll do it, but on one condition. Anything. I keep my pension, and I want Leo as my lead tech. He's better than anyone you've got in the basement." The director smiled. "Consider it done. Where do we start?" Sarah looked at the list of schools on the drive. Her eyes settled on a prestigious academy in Virginia, just miles from the Pentagon. "I've always wanted to teach at a private school," Sarah said, a cold, dangerous light returning to her eyes. "The history there is so much richer." The new teacher was coming to Virginia, and this time she wasn't just there to teach, she was there to clear the roster. As Sarah walked away, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I'm already in the faculty lounge at St. Jude's. Don't be late for the first bell, Mother." Sarah froze. The killer, Elias Thorne, wasn't just a trainee or a rival. He was the son she was told had died 20 years ago in a CIA safehouse fire. The game wasn't just professional anymore. It was a family reunion.